Welcome to CivilNet. My guest today here in Yerevan in the studio is Mr. Berge Setakian, who is president of the Armenian General Benevolent Union, whose work in the diaspora for a century and here in Armenia for these 2 decades of independence has been consistent in many, many fields, and most notably probably the American University of Armenia, which has now moved on to being not just a graduate institution but also an undergraduate institution. Berge, welcome to CivilNet. We're not going to talk about all of that. Instead, I want to talk with you about the global issues that face diaspora in Armenia, because the AGBU obviously faces those issues in not just in its activities and programs, but more importantly in making the decisions it needs to make about what direction to take, I assume.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. I mean, as a matter of fact, in the life of institutions, whether it's AGBU or any other organization, Armenian or non-Armenian, you have always to evolve with the evolution of society. And as you know better than me, society is evolving at such a fast speed that we are not being able to catch up. As a matter of fact, people talk about the turmoil today in the world and that there is a political vacuum worldwide, there is an economic crisis.
And Armenia-wide and diaspora-wide.
And at the same time, we don't realize that I think that technology has moved so fast that neither the anthropologists, nor the sociologists, nor the parliaments, nor the legislative bodies are being able to catch up. We're coming to the Armenian world, obviously with the independence of Armenia, a new reality emerged, but at the same time, the so-called diaspora also changed completely. Unfortunately, with the event in the Middle East and the last one that we are living now in Syria, the role of the Middle Eastern diaspora is doomed to some dark days. I hope that we'll see the end of the tunnel soon, but for the time being, we are not very optimistic there.
Let's try to define diaspora. There are geographic issues, there are generational issues. Who's the diaspora?
You know, I always think about that issue. Like if I go back in memory, 30, 40 years ago, we used to have one diaspora. It used to be the generation of the survivors of genocide, which went and spread all around the world. And as AGBU, it was quite an interesting experience. Every time I used to visit in the 80s or in the 70s, let's say South America or Canada or the Middle East, there was a link. Like in Buenos Aires, I used to meet the schoolmate of my grandmother from Iskenderun, my grandmother. But
like that.
What united the diaspora, I believe, was a nostalgia of the old country. And Armenia, being under a communist regime, practically closed. So the Armenian world was divided between these two realities.
That was 40 years ago.
Yeah. Now we have two types of diasporas, I believe. One is the geographical, obviously. We have the Western diaspora, which is more centralized in the United States, North America, and in France. And with the new communities, with the wave of immigration, like in Germany, in Spain, where we have about 45,000 Armenians now, in Amsterdam, and in many other places, Poland, and we have the Eastern, which I refer to mainly as Russia and Ukraine, Georgia. So it's, for geographically, it's different. Second, our main concern also, that's why I will come back to why the role of Armenia is so important. We have, with the generational gap, we have different diasporas. Like I define the East Coast of the United States and France as one diaspora, because you have to deal with a majority of third generation. While Canada and Los Angeles, it's another type of a diaspora. San Francisco, being closer to Los Angeles, belongs more to the East Coast and France. South America is another diaspora. So it's very difficult, and there is no more this close link. That's why organizations like ours, which are multinational, we try to bring together the young people through various events, whether cultural, athletic, musical, or any other means, just to create the bonds so that we maintain a certain unity of the diaspora.
The AGBU has put a lot of energy in this last couple of decades into that process of bonds. If before in the diaspora those bonds were of necessity, now you have to create a reason for the younger professional generations to want to bond. Is the purpose that internal diaspora bonding, or is Armenia one of the reasons to encourage that?
I think that there are two elements. One, I think Armenia plays the role of a catalyzer.
Does or should?
Does and should. Does because still it's a young country, it has the benefit of doubt. But unless it becomes a strong, a country which brings pride, because by the end of the day, I believe that for the new generation, the only means for them to remain attached to their roots is if their Armenian heritage brings pride in their daily life. Pride can be mainly through Armenia and through the heroes that we can produce. And I can say that we are going through a dark period of our diasporan
heroes. Yeah. Non-existent.
Aram Kachadurian is not here, we don't have a new one. William Sarayan is not here, we don't have a new one.
On the other hand, in the art scene, there are more Armenians out there than there have ever been.
That's true. Like, that's why, for instance, we have been pushing and developing as much as we can now. We have a whole department of performing arts. We have too many talented Armenians, but now we have to try to push them and give them the opportunity to excel.
On the world stage,
yes,
not just on
because if they don't excel on the world stage, they're not going to be heroes and models that people are going to look up to.
What about heroes and models that come out of Armenia? We who live here.
From what you say, outside Armenia?
From Armenia.
From Armenia.
The heroes and models that ought to come from Armenia, that are expected in any country. Yeah. In this case, not just for Armenia's sake, but also for diaspora's sake. Yeah. We here in Armenia, I think is not unfair to say that the repats in Armenia are convinced that the diaspora is going to be defined by Armenia, diasporans, individuals. Because you are by definition Armenian, therefore you must be of Armenia.
There is absolutely, I think that it has been a blessing to have an independent Armenia. As a matter of fact, I refer to some Middle Eastern old communities, like the Maronites, for instance. They ask me, after the Lebanese war, they are wondering what is the future
for them.
For them, I told them, in my humble opinion, the problem is that you had a country which you thought it is yours, and with the Lebanese war, this myth has been demystified. Your language is Arabic. You belong to a universal language. We have our unique language. You are proud to be in Vatican, to belong to this universal church, the Catholicism. But in this universality, there is a big risk of losing your identity. We have a church which has its weaknesses because it's a small church, but it's a national church. So the Armenia is, as a matter of fact, is the most important link. However, it will not be enough. I mean, I feel how we motivate young people to come to Armenia through the internship program, Musical Armenia, Discover Armenia, and on and on. The first contact is emotional, and they're motivated. The second is discovery. The third is expectation. What this country is going to look like. Unfortunately, the world economic and political situations and the geopolitical situation of Armenia makes it quite difficult to rise and shine for the time being. But I believe that with time, still, our only hope is to create a strong Armenia. That's why we invest so much in Armenia. We invest in Armenia for the sake of diaspora. There is a little bit of selfish interest. Because otherwise in diaspora, we have a big challenge. As we have a whole new generation. I believe that the majority, 70 or 80% of this new diaspora, whether it's in Russia or in the United States, it's a third generation. They all belong, I compare it always to a bottle of water. They are pure, clean. They don't have the baggage of the older diasporan generation.
The institutional.
Yes, and they are independent, they are smart, they are successful, but they all have this Armenian DNA. And we try to cater to this DNA, because if this bottle crashes, then it will be very, very costly, and for the diaspora and for Armenia.